Hello. Excellent. 1 second here, folks. Let me chat back up. Alrighty. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to our previous speaker, Assistant Deputy Minister. My name is Mark Topper from Tops Hops. I started Tops Hops about 6 years ago. We are a hop farm, full service grower, processor, distributor out in Abbotsford. We do business with many of you guys out there and continually push to establish a sustainable and high level of quality hop industry here locally in BC. Our next speaker is Lindsay Barr. She will be going over about building a sensory program within your organization. Lindsay is the CSO and founding partner of DraughtLab sensory software, where she works with food and beverage companies to apply tasting data to inform product development and quality control. Lindsay got her start at New Belgium Brewing Company at the sensory and consumer research as the sensory and consumer research specialist. For 5 years, she served as the chair of the American Society of Brewing Chemists Sensory Committee, where she led a team of experts in publishing 7 new globally adopted sensory evaluation techniques. She holds a bachelor's in science in biochemistry and molecular biology from the University of New Mexico and a master's in food science and technology from the University of California, Davis. Through DraughtLab, she's helped make sensory accessibility for companies of any size and has set her sights on continuing to develop sensory tools to inform everyday production decisions. Now, not much furthermore, I'd like to introduce and bring up Lindsay Barr herself.
Hi friends, I'm working on getting all situated here. 1 second. All right, there we go. Okay. And getting there. Okay, I think we're good. Great. Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's really good to be here. Mark, thanks for the introduction. And I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. Great. Looks like you guys can see and hear me well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get going. Yes. So many things to do. Okay, great. So you should be able to see my screen now, and hopefully you can still see my face and hear me well. Again, it's really good to be here. The last time that I was up in BC was almost exactly a year ago. I got to hang out at the Calgary Master Brewers meeting and spent a couple of weeks in Banff after that, and absolutely fell in love with it. I just fell in love with everything about Canada and just being cold and just experiencing the beauty that your land has to offer. I also had the best banh mi sandwich I've ever had in my life, ever. So, I mean, thank you for having great food and for making great beer. I visited a few breweries while I was there as well. And you guys are just like doing a bang up job. So thank you again for having me. I'm super pumped to talk to all of you folks up north. And I'm coming to you today from San Diego, California. And yeah, it's a little bit different, and I'm just itching to get back into the mountains up there. So at the end of my talk, I just want to extend a genuine and very open invite to just reach out to me directly. I really only have a few minutes to go over this. My normal talk that I like to give is about an hour or so. So it was really challenging and a welcome challenge to try to kind of pare down what I would consider to be the most important factors of starting a sensory program into about a 20-30 minute talk. So I'll be able to leave plenty of time for questions, and we can have a dynamic conversation. I'd love to hear where your community is in kind of the growth of your sensory programs and your quality control programs as a whole. So yeah, I invite you to be open and to use the chat, to use the Q&A, and please put in all of your questions throughout my talk. I will be ignoring the chat and the Q&A for now, but I really love to kind of see it going off. So please have a conversation amongst yourselves, and let's go ahead and get going. So again, like I was saying, I was challenged with trying to pare down my normal talk to about half of the time that I would give. And so I really wanted to start with distilling it down to what the overall program roadmap is for any kind of food and beverage company looking to start a sensory program. Really, the thing about sensory is it has this kind of stigma where the barrier to entry seems incredibly high. Our general idea of what a sensory program is supposed to look like usually involves booth areas. It usually involves highly trained sensory panelists that do attribute training every single week, and they taste tons of beers in a blind setting, and that image is a really difficult one to achieve, and it's really kind of it's a little intimidating for small craft breweries. Chances are, for those of you listening, I looked up a bunch of breweries in BC, and it seems like for the most part, we're all relatively small. You probably have 4, 5, 6 people who are working probably in production. Maybe you have some taproom staff, but ultimately you don't really have a lot of resources to pull on to where you can run statistically valid sensory programs. And so I want you to throw away that idea right now, and let's come to a discussion about how we just get value out of our tasting data that you're currently doing. I also would wager to bet that you are tasting your products on a regular basis. I'll bet you are tasting in fermentation. I'll bet you're tasting in maturation. I'll bet you're tasting your raw materials. I'll bet you're tasting your bright beer tanks, your finished product. You're probably tasting it from the taps. You're probably tasting it through shelf life. So you're already making decisions using flavor analysis on a daily, probably multiple times a day basis. And so what we're trying to do with our sensory program now is just start by simply tracking that data. Take what you're currently doing and let's add an additional layer of scrutiny to that process. Start databasing that information so that your data can start working for you in the long haul. And that's what I want us to set our sights on right now. We're here. We can go to, very far reaches with our sensory programs, but right now, let's just focus on getting value from day one. This is probably the most important thing that I've learned in my last 6 years at DraughtLab is we really have to get value out of our sensory programs from day one. It is not reasonable to say to management, yeah, we can run a sensory program, but we're going to need 80 hours of training, and we're going to need a booth space, and we're going to need attribute training and whatever. Like that's not going to fly. So let's just focus on getting value from day one. And then the program is going to grow as its value is recognized, as you start catching things, as you start really utilizing the data that you're coming by. Your program is going to continue to grow, and you will be able to justify more resources put into it as you get value out of it. It doesn't have to be full bore right away. Let's just kind of focus on getting incremental value and taking those steps. One of the more important things that I've learned too through my time at New Belgium, I was there for about 10 years, working with the sensory system or with the quality system, and working with an entire brewery with marketing, sales, distribution, procurement, is that the sensory program is really a cog in the overall decision-making machine of a brewery. And so our role as a program is to quickly and inexpensively provide data required to make better informed product and process decisions. We are not the end all be all decision makers. We are one piece of the puzzle that can be considered to help bolster the decision making process. I was just talking to my friend Tiffany at YCH actually, and we were talking about how sensory programs can often kind of get a bad rap because we're generally trying to dump beer or whatever. And what we were talking about we were sharing stories about how sensory has actually kind of been a savior and saved a place money. She was talking about how on a harvest season, she will have her panelists evaluate 1,400 samples in in the span of like a couple of months, which is just crazy to me. And really, there's no other tool, including analytical tools or microbiological tools, that can process that many samples so quickly and be so good at pinpointing problems in your process. And so sensory is really kind of can help save a company money by being that kind of first step in flagging problems, and also kind of just having the ability to maybe disprove a thought that is rampant in a brewery. For instance, if you have a long fermentation, or if you add different hops that you would normally add for a recipe, you would probably can assume that you would have to dump that beer, or it's maybe unsalvageable. But I cannot tell you how many times the sensory program has come through and said, actually, there's no significant difference here. Let's go ahead and sell it, or let's go ahead and blend it. So it's a really important tool through the entirety of your business. So speaking of the entirety of your business, sensory can be used to support your business objectives. And in fact, it's imperative that it must. I want to kind of ground our conversation today with like an understanding of what overall, how sensory kind of plays into the overall objectives of your business. And as a food and beverage producer, as a brewery, as a beer producer, we all have similar business objectives, but really any kind of food and beverage producer has these objectives. First of all, what we're trying to do is create a mix of core, seasonal, and pilot brands consistently, constantly. There's kind of a constant need for creativity and also overall quality, because we need to produce and scale these brands quickly, get them to market, even if it's just in a tap room or in a can. And then it's really imperative that we come through on the first time consumer experience with so much competition out there. And with a very savvy consumer, it's important that we deliver for the first time and really, do a great job at creating consumer driven products that are free of off flavors and consistent and delicious. And additionally, everyone's on a budget, especially now. I'm sure everybody is feeling the pinch. We're all on a budget, and we need to kind of bolster these business objectives in like a streamlined fashion. And so I want to talk and ground this talk on kind of the overall flow and where sensory kind of falls into the business. So we have our objectives, and then those objectives inform our goals. Those goals inform our strategy, and that strategy informs the tactics that we use to kind of, again, support those objectives. So speaking of goals, to name a few that go into those objectives is, probably one of the most important and most common goals that you have is to develop new brands that are in line with consumer expectations. There's kind of this requirement of creating new products on a regular basis while supporting the products that are consistently loved by your consumers. Our other objective or our other goal that we have on a regular basis, a daily basis in our production facilities, is to quickly release consistent beer to the market. And then also to ensure a shelf-stable product. That might not be a problem for many, but as you get into canning and bottling and distributing, shelf stability is also important. So let's just kind of talk about those three main goals that you have. Considering those three main goals, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I keep testing this hypothesis, but I do believe that these goals can be addressed by a singular strategy. And this is the strategy that I want to talk about for the rest of this talk. This is what I like to call the rapid sensory quality control framework. And it's a really good guiding structure to kind of help you formulate the tactics that you'll utilize to answer your questions. So number one, in sensory, what we're trying to do really in quality control in general is define your targets. There is no such thing as a good quality method that doesn't start with a good understanding of what it is that you're shooting for. So number one is we're defining our targets. Number two, we use those targets so that we can flag defects. And this can not necessarily be, off flavors or those kind of defects, but it's just to flag any kind of inconsistency. For example, if you know the target of your Pilsner and you're doing a test to try a different malt, maybe you're going to try to save money by going with a different maltster, or try to justify increasing the amount of money that you spend for a superior product. You would want your sensory process to be able to flag those samples either as A, being out of specification in, my first example with trying to just save money, or B, being significantly better than what you have been producing. And so these are kind of ways that you can just utilize this framework, not just for catching problems within the quality control system, but also for validating tests and making those product decisions to hit your targets, or to miss them, as it were. All right, so defining targets, flagging defects, and then you can come up with an action plan. So in our malt example, you could choose to buy the superior malt, or you could choose to not buy the malt that was going to save you some money because maybe it produced a significantly different product. And so you can come up with action plans from utilizing that, initial framework of defining your targets and flagging those inconsistencies. All right, so now let's kind of jump into the nitty gritty of what tactics go into kind of fueling this overall strategy. So I really want to focus on only three methods, really two. I'm going to gloss over one method. The three methods that every brewery should know how to execute when using sensory analysis are these three. It's the hedonic test, the description test, and the true to target test. So these are the tactics that you're going to use. These are the methods that you're going to use. So I want to jump into those in the upcoming slides. So the hedonic test, this is something that everybody is familiar with. It's probably the most commonly acknowledged sensory test. It's a subjective test. And this is why I'm kind of going to gloss over it a little bit. It definitely has a place in your system, but you have to be kind of careful because it isn't always the case that your business objective requires for you to like the products that you're making. You don't always have to like what you're making. In fact, sometimes it's probably good if you don't like it because you are not serving yourself, you are serving your customer. But the hedonic test can have a good position in your process by helping you find what you like or helping you find what your consumers like if you are asking your consumers this question. Really, the purpose of the hedonic test is to create consumer-driven specifications and or to generate buy-in. A lot of times we have to play the political game and we have to make sure that people within the brewery like the things that we're making. And if that is going to support your objective, by all means, use the hedonic test to do that. Just acknowledge it's subjective. You're not going to be able to set really solid brand targets on this, and it's not a quality control method. It's really an R&D method for the very beginning stages of what you're trying to do to create those targets. All right, how do you execute this? Participants will select a phrase that best describes their degree of liking. These phrases all correlate with a number. When you average that number, you get an average hedonic score, and you can compare different samples next to one another. You can see what's liked more than others. Everybody's kind of seen the happy face, frowny face. It's the same thing, but using words. So that's a hedonic test. Again, I'm kind of going to gloss over that because I want to focus more on those objective sensory methods that really kind of serve as that foundation for your program. So one of your main objectives is to define your brand targets. Again, every quality system requires defined specifications, and sensory is no different. It is not acceptable for you to just have an idea of what your beer is supposed to taste like. There has to be those key characteristics written down and utilized as a benchmark so that you can see where you are shifting, if you're shifting, and just have a basis for which you can objectively evaluate for overall consistency. So the description test, how you execute this is panelists describe the flavor profile of your product using a common language. So I want to pause here and talk about the common language. The common beer flavor language is utilized in the beer flavor map. This is one of the first things that we did. And back 6 or so years ago, what we really tried to do was to update the beer flavor wheel that hadn't been touched since 1973. Rather than creating a wheel, we blew it up and made it more craft centric. And utilized it in the map form. So the beer flavor map is the common beer lexicon, and has been adopted by ASBC. It's been adopted by the Brewers Guild. So it's definitely a really great lexicon. And so what we've done is integrated it into our software tools. We can talk about that offline if you'd like to talk with me about that. But what's really useful about starting from a common lexicon is you are able to get panelists to really hone in on what they are sensing in the product. Anybody who's been handed a sheet of blank paper and a pen and a beer and told to describe the beer has understood how intimidating sensory can be. If that's the basis, if that's what you know of as sensory, it's a hard industry to get into. It's a really difficult thing to kind of start that program if you really just can't put language to your experience. And so the beer flavor map is kind of a good basis to start you describing your product and lead you along with having you hone in on what you're experiencing. What's extra great about this is you're not left with a text box where you have to try to piece together all of that qualitative data to find similarities. If you're just selecting from a list of terms that are understood by the entire industry and used to communicate across different areas of the industry, you can aggregate that information and use that to build your brand targets. So the picture at the very bottom of this shows how many people selected pineapple and how many people selected mango and tropical. And so it would be reasonable to assume that this beer is pineapple-y and has a lot of mango aromas as well. So that's how the beer flavor map can be utilized. So this is how one defines targets using that check all that apply method to generate those brand targets. All right. And so not only do you get value from that written description, so if you look at the right side of the screen, you can see that once you aggregate that information, you can get that basis for which you will be able to identify flags within your process. But also you can, you have that objective target, but you can also use these written descriptions to help guide R&D by finding those similarities. Let's say you add Mosaic and you wanted to just see every single brand that you've used Mosaic in to find those similarities. You want to know for my next brand, am I going to use Mosaic to get that tropical aroma? Or do I not see that? Maybe a yeast strain. You can pivot your data based off of that information to find those similarities in your products and guide the R&D process. You can also use these written descriptions for marketing materials, sales sheets, throw them on your website, put them on your taproom menu. It really helps people to understand what they are to expect, and that can come from your sensory program really quickly. Sorry, that was maybe loud. I just dropped my microphone. Okay, I got too excited about my hands. All right, so the second thing that we're doing is flagging defects. And I like to use the true to target test to do this. The true to target test is really powerful. It's just a binary yes, no, go, no go, in, out. It goes by a lot of different names. I like the nomenclature true to target, not true to target. And here's why. I like it because it helps your panelists to recognize that what they're doing is an objective evaluation. They are not the decision makers. They are not deciding go, no go, as in go, yeah, we can ship it and, make a profit, or no go, we have to dump it and not make a profit. They're not don't put that pressure on your panelists. So I like the nomenclature true to target, not true to target, but ultimately they're all kind of the same test. And basically what we're doing is we're using that baseline target description to understand if the product in front of us is adhering to those brand specifications. So as we get into production and we're making our IPA, we can taste our IPA next to that target description and see if it falls in line with what it has to be. So does it look like it's supposed to look? Does it smell like it's supposed to smell? Does it taste like it's supposed to taste? Does it feel like it's supposed to feel? Yes or no? And then the result is the percentage of not true to target selections, along with those comments and context for where that sample falls compared to your production variation. So this will help inform if you just need to investigate a product further, or if you can just go on, ship it, let it go. This is a very fast method, and it's probably the most commonly used method. At New Belgium, this is the method that we used about 80% of the time with most companies that we work with. It's about 80% of the time is just this rapid quality control, true to target test. And what's great about that is it helps you flag those problems that require further investigation. Without spending all of your time on every single sample. If you're scaling every single attribute in every single sample that you produce, your panelists are going to get very fatigued, and you're going to start getting some weird data. And so this is just that good stopgap that helps you to flag those problems. So the example, here's an example. Here's some of the data that you can get out of the true to target test. So the image on your left-hand side shows that, you had 9 panelists that day, and 8 out of 9 said that it was true to target for aroma. That sample was true to target for aroma. Eileen said that they didn't get grapefruit, maybe more pithy or whatever, but that to me would be great, ship it. Maybe that's a threshold that you're not comfortable with, but I would be comfortable with 1 out of 9 saying that it's not true to target. The right-hand side, however, is it's a real example actually. And what we saw was, in fact, 8 out of 9 panelists saying, no, it was not true to target. And why? No citrus, no grass, the grapefruit, like not getting a lot of floral. So there's like diminished aromas or something in this. This would be something that I would flag. If 90% of your panelists are saying something's up, something is probably up, and you might want to stop that product from going out the door before you do some investigating. So really simple analysis. You can just kind of figure out what is within your normal lines of specification. And this is the basis from which you would start doing statistical analysis. But when you're starting, if 3 out of 4 panelists say that it's not great, you're probably right. It's probably not great. So don't get bogged down with having to have 10, but this is at least what you're going to be doing when you start doing statistical analysis later on. And so this will help you to quickly release or flag samples for further investigation, maybe recognize some quality trends. If you're seeing your percent defect going up and up and up, you'll be able to recognize a trend in overall quality. This can help you set best buy dates. Once your older beer starts falling outside of the acceptable range of variation in your product, you can cut that off and say best buy date is this time. And then you can also use this to analyze those test batches. So again, with our malt example, if the goal is for it to fall outside of the normal range because you want to make a better product, then it can be utilized for that. Or if your goal is to keep it in range by using a different malt, you can also use it for that. So again, this is like true to target test. It seems crazy simple because it is, but I'm telling you, it's the workhorse of every program I've worked with, which is quite a few at this point. All right, so let's just go through a quick example of going through that RSQC system. rapid sensory quality control system. One, defining targets. So, maybe, for example, the target allows for moderate to high citrus aroma with low bitterness and body. That's what you have deemed acceptable in your process. And that is the brand target that you have set for that beer. And then number two, an example would be, oh crap, 100% of my panel said that the sample had low citrus aroma. I'll probably do something about that. Then you can come up with an action plan, investigate that root cause, determine disposition, and any kind of future adjustments so that you can become a better brewer using sensory analysis. All right, so a couple of last ideas or last thoughts that I wanted to leave you with when thinking about the most important things to discuss. Really, you got nothing without a panel. I talked about utilizing a panel, and I assume that we all know what that is. It's a group of people, and that group of people don't necessarily have to be only brewers. In fact, it's for the best that they're not. You should be able to recruit people from outside of production for a number of reasons. You want them to, you don't want them to be biased. If everybody in production knows that you had a long fermentation in Bright Beer Tank 8, they're probably going to be more inclined to have that bias to fail Bright Beer Tank 8. So it's good if you have people outside of production to kind of help be really objective in their evaluations. And then you really need to generate buy-in and support from the top so that you can continue to fuel the program. Thinking about who your ideal panelists are, it's really somebody who cares about the product. It's somebody who can show up consistently and that they contribute and are courteous, convivial to others. And really the rest is trainable. Flavor analysis is relatively trainable. It's very rare that you have people that are just not sensitive. I mean, a lot of folks have said, I'm just not sensitive. I'm just not good at this. It's kind of malarkey. It's because we haven't trained our sensory selves to really hone in on our experiences. And so really the rest is trainable. If you can have somebody who's positive, who shows up, who wants to be there, that's all you need. And then you got to continue to motivate them. You got to figure out what motivates them and then do that. If people are motivated by Cheetos, by all means, buy Cheetos. It's like, it's a $2 investment, buy Cheetos, do it. And then flex. So keep panels open for longer. We all have variable schedules. If you need to get people from the night shift, keep the panel open. Just tell them, hey, I need you to taste tap 1, 2, and 3 within the next 3 days. That should be acceptable. And then, just use schedule panels in convenient central locations. I want to mention with those 2 last bullet points, I did recently write a blog post for doing at-home sensory tastings. If that is where your panel is at right now, I have some tips and tricks in our blog at DraughtLab.com. All right. And then I wanted to mention one more thing, which is training. I kind of mentioned it a few times. We tend to get really bogged down with the image of the ideal training scenario. And this is something I've been testing out and I really believe to be true. There is one framework. I'm a big fan of frameworks. There's one framework that you can utilize to do any type of training, depending on what your objective is. If your goal is to release consistent products, and using the true to target test, it can be thrown at this training framework. And I'm going to kind of go through that as a quick example. So the framework is introducing a panel to known standards. For the true to target kind of training, you would introduce them to a true to target sample and a not true to target sample. Maybe this is a 6-month-old sample. Tell them this is true to target. This one is not true to target. Let's taste them together. Let's get our calibration together. And then what you can do is test them by giving them a blind sample or a few blind samples that are either true to target or not true to target. So you're testing their recognition for what you deem to be in and out of specification. So test those recognition with blind samples and then recalibrating them by revealing the nature of those samples. So A was true to target, B was not true to target, C was somewhere in between. Go back, taste them, train your palate, recalibrate yourself. And then number 4 would be to monitor their performance in panel and in training settings. Often you might want to add a check sample in panel That's like a 6-month-old sample, and you want to just make sure they are capable of flagging something that you would deem unworthy of sale. And then repeat that. So continue to monitor the performance, repeat that. Again, this is a framework that you can use for attribute training, for true to target training, for scaled training. It can be used for basically everything. All right, and then the last thing that I want to leave you with is just to stick with it. Start now, do what you can with what you have. Chances are you're already tasting your beer. Add one layer of scrutiny to it by databasing that information. Begin with that RSQC process that, define your target, flag those defects, come up with an action plan. And then your program really is only as strong as your people. So keep on cultivating a strong group of panelists and that culture of quality. If you're a new brewery, you have a really great opportunity to cultivate that culture of overall quality. And again, we're here to help. I'm Lindsay. You can contact me at lindsay@draughtlab.com, or you can contact any of us at info@draughtlab.com. I'm happy to talk you through the process, happy to talk you through like any of our products as well. And yeah, so with that, I would be happy to open up to some questions. Thanks again.
Hey, Lindsay, I'm trusting you guys can hear me. Thanks so much for a wonderful introduction to sensory. It's the most, I've always said in my career that you could you could miss any meeting that you wanted to, but you could never miss Taste Panel. So listen to this woman. But here's some questions from different people. Some of them, let's try them all. Alan's wondering, how can you trust that your untrained sensory panelists actually understand what they're tasting? Would you need to give a basic 1 to 2 day training on tasting beer in general before getting the panel going?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, chances are most people in your brewery probably are familiar with drinking beer. And now it's just a matter of going from drinking to evaluating. And so it's good to kind of start them with an overall idea of how to intentionally go from drinking to evaluating. And so just going through the basics of the senses is probably all you need to do. Point them to what you're trying to look for in the visual aspects, the aroma aspects, taste, mouthfeel, and go through just how to evaluate a beer intentionally. The data will end up showing you who has a high level of sensory acuity, but that really comes with time, and it comes with repetition, it comes with training. The first thing that I was tasked with at New Belgium was to drink Fat Tire every day. And I was like so over the moon. I'm like, great, yeah, sure, I'll drink Fat Tire every day. This is part of my job. But really, there was a lot of wisdom in that. And if you are just getting repetitions of evaluating your products, talking about your products, it's a great place to start. You really don't need to test your panelists for sensory acuity right away. I am all about an open, door approach, at least initially, until you've given your panelists enough training and you've recognized maybe somebody just really isn't making it happen. And we can talk about it's a touchy subject to like kick a panelist off, and I try not to do it. But really initially, just teach them how to evaluate a beer and get them consistently doing it. Get them drinking your flagship products daily.
Cool. So here's another question on training. It's clearly and this is about training individuals. And I laugh about this one because there are people all over the world laughing about the fact that I can't taste diacetyl until it gets about 1.5 times threshold. It's not that I haven't tried. So the question from Jessica is, how does one go about training their own palate?
Yeah, Jessica, it's a good question. You guys are good questions. So I'm going to take kind of like a broad approach with this. I think that just paying attention and being really intentional about what you're tasting and what you're experiencing in the world is a good place to start. Again, I'm going to say consistently evaluating beers, consistently tasting with your community, having those discussions, I think is really helpful. Tasting with your group of panelists, I think is really helpful, and growing your lexicon together. Honestly, I like to do what's called grocery, standards, and grab a whole bunch of citrus fruits from the grocery store, cut them up, smell them, and discuss with your panelists like what makes them different, what makes them the same, how like you're just kind of really being intentional about what you're evaluating. So that, and then just consistently drink your products and be intentional about what you're tasting. It's all about kind of being curious and kind of like being really intentional and mindful about what you're experiencing on a daily basis. That might not be like the most exciting answer in the world. Of course, I think in the brewing industry, we are very heavily focused on attribute training, and that's not such a bad thing, but that really makes it such that our lexicon is very defects oriented, and that doesn't really serve us that well as an industry. That's unique to beer, and it's not really seen in other industries. So I think attribute training is great. If you can like, buy chemical aromas, it's great, but it's part of your process. So again, start with the beer flavor map language, buy some of those fruits, smell them, taste them, buy some flowers, smell them, taste them, be intentional about what you're experiencing, and try to apply that to your evaluations in beer, and then just repeat, repeat, repeat.
Great. There's lots of questions here. So here's a great one. Often tasting sessions are less productive than they could be due to the nature of what we drink. How much beer do you pour, and how many samples are most people able to do before they're too fatigued or distracted to provide useful information?
Yeah. So what you're describing is common, and especially in beer, because we get a little loopy. But the thing that I would probably ground us on here is to set the expectations when you're running a roundtable evaluation that you're here to answer a specific question. And so as a sensory panel leader, you kind of have to set that energy and say, this is what we're trying to answer, this is what we're trying to learn, this is what we're here to do. Not, just kind of like drink haphazardly. If you're doing a sensory evaluation without a purpose, it can get derailed really quickly. So you have to be grounded in the purpose of that tasting. The other thing that I would probably tell you to do is to start with an independent evaluation first. For example, with DraughtLab, you can do your individual evaluations on your phone, and then you can come back together and have a discussion once your evaluations are submitted and done. And what's great about that is you get your objective, independent evaluation from each of those individuals without one person pulling the discussion in one way or another. That can, get derailed really quickly, and you'll find no value in your sensory program if that's the case. And it will be very frustrating for everybody on board. And so have everybody do their independent evaluation digitally if you can. And then you can look at your data together, have a roundtable discussion, and focus on what your goal is, like what your objective is for that conversation. As far as level of pour, I am a believer that you don't need more than 2 ounces of beer to get a full evaluation. So you might want to pour 3 ounces, but you really don't have to drink an entire pint. In fact, it's pretty dangerous to do so, so don't. So 2-3 ounces is really all you need for a good evaluation. And then I don't go up. It depends on what kind of beers you're tasting. For like an IPA, I wouldn't go up for over 8 samples in a setting, and make sure you're drinking a lot of water. So you should be able to keep it below 8 samples, 2 ounces. You're going to drink less than a pint in a tasting, and that should be enough to get your evaluation done.
Great. Can you talk about in-process beer tasting?
Yeah, sure. In-process beer tasting, I am not a big fan of tasting in fermentation, because the sensory question that you're asking is this beer eventually going to be good if you can taste through all of the weird fermentation flavors? And that's kind of a weird question to ask. So the first time that I taste in process is really in maturation at the end of fermentation, once you've crashed the tank. You have to set your expectation that you're looking for like flaws. You're really looking for big deviations. You're not like going through a fine-tooth comb and scrutinizing every single intensity of every attribute that's in there, because it's messy. In process is messy. And so You have to really just kind of set your expectations that you're just flagging problems, looking for those kind of egregious issues that might make you need to blend a sample or to maybe hold it for further investigation. But it's just set your expectations that you're not going to be going through it with a fine tooth comb. In my opinion, probably the most important evaluation is at the bright beer tank. If you can do a BBT evaluation before you put beer in a package, then that would be that's where you should kind of put more of your focus. I actually just recently wrote a pretty verbose article about this in the New Brewer. So if you guys get the New Brewer, check it out online, and I go through detailed examples of what to look for in processed beers and how to set your expectations up for that kind of evaluation. So check out that article in the New Brewer.
I realize that I'm just being told I can't go any later than 10:55, but these are such good questions. Would a question from Brandon, how far outside of production would you recruit a panel from? Would it be beneficial to have random customers participate once in a while?
Yeah, you have to be careful with that, mostly because your random customers are inclined to be really excited and enthusiastic about your product. So they're probably inclined to be like, it's great, it's great, it's great, it's great, because you're giving them free beer. So you kind of have to recruit the right people. But we all know of those normal patrons that know your product really well and are willing to give you objective feedback. I say go for it. If you can, go for it. Get as many people as you can, if you're confident that they can give you objective feedback. And so yeah, I'm into kind of recruiting outside of the production facility in general. If you can get more people, that's actually it's kind of ideal if you can again get that objective feedback. I don't see a problem with it, as long as they can show up relatively consistently. You might want to use those types of panelists for like packaged beer releases or shelf life studies or consumer studies. And if I didn't talk about consumer studies at all, but really the best way of doing consumer studies is to draw on your consumers that are already bought into your product, and that are already kind of your super consumers, because you do want to kind of cater to them. So maybe utilize them for more of those hedonic questions. What are you liking? And we can talk about that more offline if you're interested. You can always reach out to me about consumer research. And I also just recently did a talk with the ASBC. If you're an ASBC member, I talked about it and it's in their archives.
The last two questions, I think I promise, but they're kind of tied together. Is the beer flavor map available and what does it cost? And do you have any apps or computer programs you would recommend to enter sensory data in?
Weird.
Did you pay these two people?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. I'm intentional about talking about sensory, but I mean, my whole career is this. It's what we've done is we've created a sensory software tool that is accessible for small craft breweries that helps you run that framework of the RSQC process, defining those targets, flagging those defects, coming up with an action plan. Our software is called DraughtLab. You can sign up. It's at the base level. You can do a trial for a month through our website. You can also just reach out to me. But if you go to our website, you can sign up for a trial for 30 days. And those subscriptions are monthly, no contracts, and they start at $50 a month. So we tried to make that really accessible for you to be able to bring this to life. And so that's where I would suggest you go for that. And there is no other tool out there. The other thing is, with the beer flavor map, yes, the beer flavor maps are available, in the digital form. That's what we integrate as our description test in the DraughtLab app. So it's already integrated digitally. There's also a base malt flavor map, a specialty malt flavor map, hop flavor map, kombucha, cider, seltzer. There's a whole bunch of them if you make those products as well. And we can integrate that into your program. As far as print versions go, you can find that on DraughtLab.com. And yes, we sell print versions. They're really beautifully printed. You can get flat or folded flavor maps, and I think they're around $15 unless you buy them in bulk. They're a little cheaper. So yeah, thank you for that. Thanks for that question.
And Jackie has, thank you, Jackie, has placed the link for your website onto for the beer flavor map onto the chat. So thank you so much. I really appreciate. I'm going to stop and say there's also someone from Red Shed Malting saying that in the chat that they've used your DraughtLab and how good it is. So there we go. We have a customer recommendation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lindsay, for coming and doing this. And DraughtLab amazes me because I remember the days when, as the quality control manager, I came into panel with my calculator and all my little pieces of paper and tried to madly do the calculations while everybody else was having a beer. It wasn't any fun at all. So.
No more.
This is really beautiful. So really appreciate you taking the time and helping bring this great information to all our people.
Great.
And
thank you.
Thank you for Tops Hops for sponsoring the session. We appreciate your support and the hops you're growing and pelletizing out there in the Fraser Valley. Our next session will start at 11 o'clock. We'll get to hear Keith Armstrong from Great Western Brewing talking about malt, another great necessity for making great beer.